So, I'm actually quite a big fan of the iconic cartoon duo known as Tom and Jerry. And how can you not know who these guys are? I mean, these are two of the most iconic cartoon characters of all time. They have been a part of our culture for so long and been a part of so many great animated shorts. It's hard not to ignore their impact on pop culture. So when I found out that there was a Tom and Jerry movie coming to HBO Max, I was certainly going to be interested in watching it. And I figured, hey, since there's a lot I had to say about both the characters of Tom and Jerry and the movie itself, I figured it would be a good opportunity to maybe review and take a deep dive at this Tom and Jerry movie. So let's get started. Let's go right into talking about the Tom and Jerry movie I watched on HBO Max. Well, here it is. It's good that we're talking about this movie because honestly, this is one of those movies I have a very infamous experience with. To give you an idea, and for those who remember, God, I'm getting so old now. You ever gone to Blockbuster or any sort of video store to rent a movie? You're a young, impressionable kid browsing the shelves through the store, and you find a movie that catches your eye, that's part of a property that you're already familiar with and in love with. Even though you haven't maybe heard of this movie, you probably are interested because, hey, this is a movie of something you like, and hey, it's a full-fledged movie version of that thing. So surely it's going to be great, isn't it? Then you go home, pop the movie in your VCR, start watching it, and then as it goes on, you start to realize something. Despite the title giving you the impression that this is going to be the definitive movie version of that thing you like, you come to realize that this movie version of that thing you like doesn't do a good job of representing the thing that you already love. So you come very disappointed by the end of it. This is something that I'm sure most people have experienced, at least something like this. And there are two distinct times where I remember this exact thing happening to me as a young, impressionable kid. And that was for the Super Mario Brothers movie. And this movie right here. The Tom and Jerry movie was one of the first major movies I saw where, even watching it as a kid, something didn't feel right about it. In regards to adaptations of iconic properties, this is the first time where I noticed a lot was wrong, and upon further reflection over the years, this movie was not good in regards to it being a proper adaptation of Tom and Jerry. And since it was on HBO Max, I decided to watch it for the first time in about 20 years. And this is one trip of a movie that doesn't get its source material right and feels so much like other animated movies in the worst possible way. So let's dive in and really see what makes the Tom and Jerry movie such a bizarre piece of work as a film. So after the opening credits, the film starts out with Tom's owners moving away. Not an owner that we recognize, however, just some generic lady, and they even have a generic mean dog in this movie. Not Spike, though, just some generic mean bulldog, which already, that's kind of the first problem with this movie. There are all these characters that have been well established in Tom and Jerry, but we don't really get any of them here. There's no Butch, no Spike, no Tuffy the Mouse. All of them do not appear with the exception of Droopy the dog, who isn't even really a Tom and Jerry character. And even if he was, his moment is regulated to a cameo for like 5 seconds. And I have no idea why he keeps appearing on like the poster of this movie when he's only in it for, again, 5 seconds. For a franchise that has been around for a few decades at this point, it's weird that they don't bring any attention to some of these major characters, and instead they opt for a new cast. But we'll get to more of them once we get there. But as Tom's family is moving, he of course gets into a conflict with Jerry, leading them to be a part of their traditional hijinks, only for them to be left behind from their own family. And then they have to roam around the streets on their own looking for a new home, which actually makes some decent character interaction between Tom and Jerry. Seeing these characters both knowing that they're at their lowest point, but also trying to make amends during this time, despite the fact that their history has not been the greatest, is actually kind of admirable to see. But that all changes when they come across this dog named Pugsy and his little flea friend named Frankie. They talk about Tom and Jerry about getting along and becoming friends. So we're about 10 minutes into this movie, and
I'm Tom.
I'm Jerry.
yeah, Tom and Jerry start talking, and it's really surreal to see after knowing these characters for so long and them being known as the most iconic silent duo. Granted, they do freak out about the fact that they both talk, so we're not alone, but it still comes out of nowhere, as prior to this point, there's not really an indication that this is where the film is going to go. And the whole reason why they haven't talked up until this point? Oh, get this.
How come you never spoke before?
Well, there was nothing I wanted to say that I thought you'd understand.
They never had a good time to say anything. So, after all these years, all these moments of conflict, the whole reason you guys didn't talk is because there wasn't anything to say at the time? I guess there wasn't anything to say when Jerry nearly got sliced open, or when Tom wanted to explain what was causing all the trouble to his owner. This explanation just comes across as so half-assed and lazy. And yes, I get that technically speaking, Tom and Jerry have talked before in the past. This isn't their first time talking. Whenever they did talk, it was always for a brief moment, and it was usually always a part of some sort of joke that they had, or maybe dancing with Gene Kelly for whatever reason. However, this movie goes straight with Tom and Jerry talking. And this wouldn't be so bad if these characters actually stood out. When you watch this movie, you honestly could have replaced these characters with any happy-go-lucky cartoon duo. And what made Tom and Jerry stand out is how much they wanted to one-up one another. They're both overconfident and cocky at various points when they know they are winning, but we don't get that here. They just decided to settle their difference just now after they received their voices, which Jerry gets the voice of Max from Goof Troop.
You said it. I didn't.
Meanwhile, Tom gets the voice of...
All right, that does it. You little...
I get that the filmmakers probably wanted them to be friends at some point in the movie, but it would have worked if this movie actually takes time for them to team up. Really, this movie should have been them having a conflict throughout the entire film's runtime, just on a grander scale. And then when it's time for the real big threat to show up, that would be the time for them to actually team up. And if they did that, it would become more worthwhile and interesting and wouldn't feel so sudden. But they are just friends automatically after 10 minutes of screen time, which also caused kind of a lack in tension in this movie as well. Although I guess I shouldn't be complaining because I really should have taken that hint before the movie started when the VHS intro included an advertisement for the film's soundtrack.
6 all-new songs from award-winning composer Henry Mancini.
And it even has a shot of Tom and Jerry looking like they are singing and dancing, so I probably should have taken the hint. Oh yeah. I guess this is the perfect time to mention that Tom and Jerry, the movie, is actually a musical. But is it a good musical?
No.
Now, I've seen worse animated movies. I have seen worse movie musicals. I have seen worse animated movie musicals from the 90s. Tom and Jerry, the movie, is not one of those movies. I say this because I feel like the soundtrack does have some things to stand out. As this first song, Friends to the End, I honestly kind of like it. I'll start with the praises. It does have a nice melody to it, and the orchestration is actually really good in this, making this movie feel like a much bigger musical than it has any right to be. The issue with these songs in particular is that you are having the wrong characters sing it. This is Tom and Jerry, a duo iconic for being silent and having an ongoing conflict. This song establishes, yeah, all those times I tried to murder you, and all the times you tried to kick me out of my own house, nah, it's all good. We're best of friends. Like, years and years of conflict just vanish. The song would stand out as a potentially decent song from an underrated animated film, but they had to make it based on the two characters that should not be singing this song. So it's not so much that the music is bad, it's just more so inappropriate for this franchise to be doing a song like this. It doesn't properly represent the franchise that well. After that, Pugsy ends up getting kidnapped by a dog catcher, leaving Tom and Jerry set to face off against, well, what else? A gang of alley cats. Now, the bad news is we get another song very shortly after the first. But the good news is, and I'm gonna be real with you here, this song actually kinda slaps.
What do we care about nice? What do we care about sweet? All that we care about spice
And deceit!
eating the mice, cheating the dice.
Possibly because, unlike the last song, Tom and Jerry don't sing this one. But even taking them out of it, it's pretty upbeat and kind of serves as a neat little villain song with this West Side Story jazz style to it. I think it might be the best song in the whole movie. But it again has another major setback, as this sequence feels entirely pointless in the grand scheme of things. Because after that, this gang of alley cats, they never show up again. Yeah, that song that seems like it was gonna set up Tom joining this gang of alley cats and then more hijinks ensue, but nope, it's just filler. Yeah, way to ruin the best song in the entire movie with characters that are never mentioned again, with not even a mention of other Tom and Jerry characters. You would think that would be a good opportunity for them to come across against Butch, Spike, or Tuffy, but of course none of them appear, and you think they would, considering that this was trying to be the definitive Tom and Jerry movie. But instead, after they come across the gang of alley cats, they run into this character, someone named Robin. No, not that Robin. No. There you go. She's a little girl that has a father too busy going on adventures, so she has to be watched over by, what else? An evil aunt, known as Aunt Fig. Eventually, Tom, Jerry, and Robin are taken to her aunt's place, where we see more about what Aunt Fig's plan is. Because of Robin's dad's unknown whereabouts and Robin's mom being dead, there's a chance that Aunt Fig can get a huge fortune of money from this. So of course she wants to keep Robin for her greedy self, which leads to possibly the most iconic line from this entire movie, said by legendary actor Tony Jay.
We've got to have money.
So at this point you can tell what the main problem with this movie is. Orphan girl going on an adventure with a few talking animals to escape from evil family member who wants them for their own greedy needs. This is very much at its core a standard kids movie plot, with having a lot of cliches you would see from kids movies at that time, animated or not. Its story is fairly generic at its core. The only major difference this time around is that Tom and Jerry are shoehorned into this plot. Like I said, you could replace them with any other duo and the core story would still be the same. It wouldn't change the songs or character motives since they were made exclusively for this movie and have nothing really to do with Tom and Jerry's main core conflict. That's why this movie isn't a good Tom and Jerry movie, because it feels like they just came up with this plot on a whim and they thought of the most standard plot you can do for a movie of this time. Though it's also a double-edged sword, because even though this movie doesn't work as an adaptation, the only reason this movie is remembered at all is because Tom and Jerry are in it, and it's so out of place for them to be in this movie because of what this movie is and what they stand for. Elements that are exclusive to this movie don't stand out because it's all the kind of stuff we've seen in movies like this before. Oh yeah, and Aunt Fig gets a song about her wanting to be rich, stuff we've seen before, and Robin gets a song about her being alone and sad. Again, this is stuff we've seen plenty of times. It makes this movie less interesting in that regard, which, yeah, it is blatant that Tom and Jerry's involvement in this movie was thought of at the last minute. This film would not be in this infamous status that it's in right now. So in the mix of Aunt Fig and Robin's conflict, what are Tom and Jerry doing in all of this? Well, they have some chases with another fat dog on a skateboard. It leads to some slapstick, sure, but it's kind of disappointing as we're not seeing the duo be involved in some crazy slapstick shenanigans as they were in the shorts. Even the stuff that does happen to the dog isn't as crazy or over the top or violent as what the very best that Tom and Jerry had to offer. But the chase did leave enough of an impact for the kitchen to get practically destroyed. So Aunt Fig take Tom and Jerry to this guy who can take care of animals, and he is known as, and I quote, Dr. J. Sweet Face Applecheek. Rolls right out the tongue, doesn't it? So I guess Tom and Jerry are now being taken care of by this really swell dude. No, he's evil. He even has a song explaining why he's evil for some reason.
I make outrageous oodles from peeps and palms and poodles. 10 grand a day, those rich old fools will pay.
Fortunately, Tom and Jerry did meet some familiar faces as they run into Pugsley and Frankie again. They get their help after Tom and Jerry explain their situation regarding Robin, as they overheard Fig discussing Robin's father is also alive, so their mission is now to take Robin to her father. Thankfully, they're able to escape with some clever moves, though not until a brief little cameo by the only somewhat pre-existing Tom and Jerry character.
Hello, all you happy people.
Though I prefer his later work in the new Tom and Jerry movie, just for the record. They escape, they get Robin back, and find a convenient boat to make their escape, until the boat ends up getting shipwrecked, separating our three heroes yet again. But fortunately, Robin was saved by the strangest character to appear in a Tom and Jerry thing.
Great wobbling wattles!
A pirate with a hand puppet voiced by Rip Taylor. He talks to Robin about his travels all throughout the world, through the only way this movie can, acquiring feature length by having a mediocre song.
Am I a ham or am I not?
I guess the answer's yes.
Meanwhile, Big and Lickboot, God, these names get odder and odder the more this movie goes on, send out a warrant for Robin as a way to get them for themselves, so they can of course get rich. But like every other adult in this movie, the pirate guy and his hand puppet end up wanting the warrant for themselves because they're actually evil, of course. Thankfully, Tom and Jerry come in to save the day and get Robin to escape. But this is where the movie becomes a little weirder than it was before. We get this whole gang of bizarre characters from other movies chasing down two of the most iconic cartoon characters and a little girl just for their own gain. Granted, this chase we see has some energy, I guess, but it's really odd when you consider who's involved. You got Aunt Karen Fig, Judge Claw Glickbooth, and Big Boy Dog over here, along with Rip Taylor and his Muppet, along with Sweet Bean, Shitface, Apple Fritter, Buckcheeks joining in on the chase as well. Well, not until we got to see him make some very uncomfortable moves towards an ice cream bicycle. So yeah, this chase is on, and it's wacky, and I guess it's the most Tom and Jerry it gets here. Though I would prefer a Tom and Jerry movie to be crazy and maybe more centered around Tom and Jerry themselves. You know, maybe Tom and Jerry and Mad Max. Will that ever be a thing? They eventually get to this cabin off the lake thinking Robin's father is in there, but it's an ambush. But it can't just be an ambush. What's an easier ways to raise the stakes here? There we go. Fortunately, Robin's dad shows up in a Deus Ex Machina fashion, saves Robin, but leaves Tom and Jerry to die. Okay, they don't die. They survive, of course, being cartoon characters and all. Anyway, Tom and Jerry,
Who did not die? Oh, isn't that swell?
are saved, and Robin and her father decide that the best option for them is to give them a home of their own. And then the movie ends with, what else? Tom and Jerry chasing one another like old-time sakes, where they completely forgot and abandoned Robin and will never speak again because that's the way the game works. So what have we learned after nearly 30 years since this movie has come out? Well, since then, Tom and Jerry have had dozens and dozens of movies, all of them having these characters get into different scenarios with varying degrees of results, from standard chases to weird crossovers. But this movie does stand on its own as being the first feature-length film starring these two characters, and being one of the few sole Tom and Jerry movies with no extra stuff like magic rings, wacky races, or recreating classic movies like Willy Wonka. However, most of these movies I mentioned are just standard, really. They don't do anything extravagant or iconic for these characters, which actually does make this movie stand out for better or worse. This is Tom and Jerry's first film, and man, they did not know what to do with these characters in this very bland and odd film that really could have been a proper tribute to these characters. However, if I can say some good things about this movie, it's that it's not boring. Yeah, there are still some generic crap here, but this movie is both hilariously enjoyable and fascinating. It's fascinating how they completely missed the mark on what these characters should be, and the blatant cash grab of this idea does make this movie much worse. Despite that, I do kind of recommend it because it's interesting and at points kind of hysterical to watch. I mean, with a movie doing both things like making mute characters talk and having an evil ice cream man named Applejack Fat Cheeks, makes this movie one of those so bad it's good to watch. It's a movie I watched this past year with friends and kind of had a blast due to how bad it really was. In a sense, if you're looking for a movie to make fun of, this comes pretty recommended. It may not be a good Tom and Jerry movie, but it is at least a decent movie to watch for the pure insanity of it. And the fact that it exists at all makes it one of the weirdest movies to ever exist based on one of the most recognizable cartoon characters of all time. So take that for what it's worth.
Hey, you guys are the greatest! I love it!
You are terrific!
Man, that was a mouthful. Although, I feel like I'm forgetting something in all of this. Oh yeah, the new Tom and Jerry movie that I didn't really talk about here. That review's coming later. Love you guys, bye!